I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar on influencer marketing. We're pleased to be joined by Agency A, and I guess I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear? I just had to check. Wicked. Thank you very, very much for joining our webinar. The topic, as you know, is influencer marketing. Have ambassadors become a more sustainable option for brands amidst a global pandemic? I'm Ria. I'm the CEO of Agency A, and I'm joined here by John O'Robson, who's our Senior Account Manager. In addition, Anne and David, who very kindly joined our panel. The theme of the webinar will be an interactive and hopefully very insightful discussion around the topic. It's very slide light. We've decided not to use any slides because we'd like to encourage everyone to get involved and ask their own questions and to let the panelists speak for themselves. So without further ado, I would love to invite David to kind of, in his own words, tell us a little bit about himself, his background, and his interest in joining the webinar today.
Thanks, Ray. My name's David Wing. I'm the CEO and founder. CEO. It's just a few of us. So what's the point? I'm the founder of Wing Digital Marketing, and I've been running business-to-business influencer marketing campaigns for around 7 years now. I've worked as a director of influencer marketing for a couple of companies now. The last one was in London, and recently made the move over to Brazil. So started my own agency there. Obviously, I've known Ria for a little while now, Anne as well, and I was very pleased to be asked to take part in this panel. And I hope this is of value to everybody listening. Obviously, ambassador marketing, it's such a growth area, and it's something that doesn't take too much for any size business to properly get real results from. But we'll go into more of that. Thank you.
Wonderful. And the same question to Anne.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very pleased to be part of this panel today. I head up a small boutique agency called Nfluential in South Africa, Johannesburg, and we specialize in creating strategies for influencer marketing specifically for brands. It's something that we saw much lacking in South Africa, where we sort of just use influencers as a tactic and not much thought behind it, and saw the gap, and this is where we are today. My background is in PR and influence marketing, but obviously more on the influence marketing side today. Ambassadors is becoming more and more prevalent. So we see it happening over the last year or two in South Africa as well. So hopefully that trend will continue, but we'll get into that a bit later.
Fantastic. And then obviously, but as you can see, John sat right beside me. So yeah, the same question.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining again. A bit about me. I spent 10 years in hospitality, working in kitchens as a chef, which was a very exciting career, but obviously have taken a bit of a sidestep into the world of digital marketing. Much prefer being in an office than a kitchen, I can tell you that much. My involvement with the company is essentially heading up the influence marketing side of things to help brands educate themselves and then in turn educate their audience base by utilising influencers in that way. We work across ambassador campaigns, what we refer to as drip feed campaigns. Back when we were working with a lot of restaurants, there was events and whatnot. So we work in lots of different ways to essentially find the best way to communicate brands or connect brands with their audiences.
Fab. And that's wicked. So to kick off, and I guess maybe as a little bit of an icebreaker for our audience and for us to understand a bit more about everyone's knowledge in the space, it would be great if we could do, obviously if we're all in the same room, we could ask by show of hands, but since we're not, it would be great to do kind of by show of leaving on or turning off your camera. So I'm going to ask 3 introductory questions, and if you agree with the question, then leave your camera on, and if you disagree, then I would just turn your camera off, which would be wicked. I guess most people, well, it might work if the people who have their cameras already off might have to switch it on and off. But let's give it a go. Not done this before. So by show of cameras on, how many people have worked with influencers before? So if you have worked with influencers before, leave your camera on. If you haven't, leave it off. It's a bit like Take Me Out, the corporate version. Wicked. And the second question that I have is, in general, generally speaking, do you believe that influencer marketing is a strategic part of your marketing mix, or would you consider working with influencers as part of your ongoing marketing strategy? So if you would consider working with them and you think you would believe in their value, leave your camera on. If you don't think they're relatively valuable, or perhaps wouldn't consider using them, then turn your camera off. It's good for the audience perspective. And finally, the final question is, are you familiar of the differentiation between influencers and ambassadors? So if you are aware of the differentiation between the two, leave your camera on. And if you aren't, then turn your camera off. Bit of a mix. We've got some new people as well. Maybe I can ask that question again. Wicked. Well, that tells us a little bit about our audience. And now, as I mentioned, we're going to kick off with some questions for our panel. Throughout, there's 3 thematic questions. We will kind of ask them chronologically. But at the end of each section, if you would like to ask any of your own questions or potentially give any insight that you have, feel free to do so either via the waiting room or feel free to just ask out loud. So the first question is to the panelists. Obviously, in preparation for the webinar, we were discussing that each individual works with influencers or ambassadors quite differently. So for us, as Johnny mentioned, we work more B2C. We work with, most of our work is in the food and beverage sector. So we book people into restaurants, and we have, that's the kind of work that we would do. But for Anne and David, I know it's slightly different. So for each of the panelists, my question is, can you just describe how you work with influencers or how you work with ambassadors on an ongoing basis?
Anne, ladies first.
Thank you. I think in my space, we do a lot more B2C work than we do B2B work. We also do B2B work, but it's a small percentage of the work we do. We mainly work with influencers in the traditional sense on social media, but we are lately seeing a lot more ambassador work come through. Most of our ambassador work is through our nano influencers. So the very small guys, very authentic, highly engaged audiences, but they're already brand fans. So they already use your product. So we do a lot of that more kind of ambassador work.
Wicked.
My work is slightly different in that I'm wholly in the B2B sector, and oddly enough, B2B influencer marketing it's not something that's it's getting more and more popular now, but it's not something that's been quite so clear to most brands for quite some time. It's only in the last few years that it's started to properly develop. Our social medias of choice tend to be areas like LinkedIn and Twitter. And you might see a little bit of it on Facebook, but it's always a case of trying to spread out a little bit and see what other avenues you can go down. But our influencers tend to automatically become ambassadors, in that we don't generally pay influencers, unlike in the B2C sector. We look for a partnership that's mutually beneficial exchange. So we'll promote them through the brand, and the brand will, and they'll promote the brand through their own channels.
Cool. And then from our side, we wholly work in B2C for the time being. When I first started with the company, which is around 2.5 years ago, it was primarily, as Ria said, sort of experience-based. So, influencers going down to restaurants or having brands and then showcasing their experience from there. However, we actually started looking to sort of integrate the ambassador campaigns towards the end of last year, because we felt there's more value in getting people integrated in a long-term strategy. Not only them posting on their channels, but also the brands posting about them. So it's sort of had more of a continuous conversation going. And then from there, obviously, as the pandemic hits, there's been a big sort of shift in how people are using influencers. And we've definitely sort of adapted with that, which we'll go into more of it a bit more.
yeah, that leads on to my next question, which is, have you seen, you know, a big differentiation in the industry before the pandemic, through the pandemic, and I guess now as we're hopefully, maybe not with, you know, Corona 2.0 with the lockdown approaching, but have you seen a shift in, you know, the way in which the industry tackles activities as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen it in the beginning of the pandemic. Obviously, everyone was a bit frozen. We didn't know what was going on. And I think pre-pandemic, it was very much still, especially in the B2C space, in a lot of the industries, was still very superficial. It was still kind of very curated. It was very much like, oh my gosh, I love this, look how cute. And it's really shifted in the pandemic to having that connection and that community and the relatability. And we saw a lot more real content coming through. And the brands also started doing that. It was no longer enough to tell people about this is the benefits or you could really use this. It was more about that deeper conversation. People were looking for connection. They were looking for community. And just kind of speaking about those human truths that we were all going through. I feel like the field was kind of leveled. Everyone was at home. Everyone was going through the same thing. And that really, I would say, a positive change in influencer marketing for us, where we could start having real conversations and we could see that authentic kind of connections come through and engagement from our audiences.
That's a really good point, because I was reading an article that David actually shared about B2B influencer marketing, which obviously he's mentioned that LinkedIn is very B2B focused. Yeah. And that talks about how, you know, in contrast to B2C, B2B influencer marketing is relationship building, and it focuses primarily on the relationships that are important. And have you seen that accelerate as a result of the pandemic in addition? Because upon reflection, I was thinking, actually, you know, if you go to industry events or webinars or meet people face to face, you have that opportunity to build a relationship. Where we've all been locked down and we've had to be entirely remote and digitally focused, have you seen an acceleration of B2B influencer marketing in the same way that Anne's mentioned, because of the kind of value and relationship piece?
Thank you. Yes. Well, I mean, I suppose a lot of the brands that I've worked with and I'm working with already had their relationships built already, so it was more of a continuation. And sure, we were losing the physical meet and greet, but a lot of these relationships were already built. There was already a sort of a core group per brand that would already have online engagement, digital engagement together, be that through you know, sharing of each other's content, you know, Twitter chats, you know, live Q&As, podcast invitations and the like. And the wonderful thing is that with B2B, it tends to be quite tech heavy in itself. It's usually for big brands that do that kind of thing. So the usage of things like Zoom has been there for years now. I mean, Zoom was a typically small company, or not really, so people weren't so aware of it until the pandemic hits, and suddenly it's this behemoth of a company. So you can see real growth opportunity there, and it's just looking for it. But in regards to the B2B side of things, yeah, I mean, the opportunity continues, but it just means trying to do something a little bit different. You're trying to make the audience understand that, you know, you're not just quite so much a B2B grey automaton. You know, you can be a B2C fun person. You can try something different and try and engage your audience a lot more.
Yeah, I think definitely from our side we saw a big shift from sort of product focused to ethos focused. I think particularly because the majority of our clients fell into the F&B sector, so it's obviously quite hard to showcase your experience when your restaurant's closed. So how do you tackle that? It's by, you know, building these communities, encouraging people to sort of be a part of something more than just, you know, going to a pub. You actually create a genuine community of people who are sort of interacting, sharing thoughts, you know, who have similar interests. I think there's been definitely more of a demand for educational, how-to focused content. You know, that saw the rise of TikTok go absolutely through the roof because that's perfect for that platform. And I think that sort of carried through onto, because we mainly work in Instagram and Facebook. So sort of taking the educational, value-driven content and putting that into the campaign, I think it's definitely been the shift that we've seen.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of summarized my next question, which was essentially like ahead of this webinar, and I guess from our experience, as Johnny said, we've seen a shift from kind of vanity to value, which would be a good way to sum it up, or maybe perfection to personality, or something like that. But that kind of rings true to what you guys have said. So what would be your tips for someone who said, okay, but how do I find these individuals that will build the community, that will be a genuine advocate? How do I differentiate those? You know, how do I source them?
I think the first thing you need to do is get online and see who's actually talking about your brand, who's talking about your product or your services. And that could be done through a simple advanced search if you're on Twitter. And there's definitely tools that you can use for that. Just put in keywords and see also what people are saying about you. It's also winning over those who doesn't have a great something to say about you, isn't it? It's pulling them into conversations and find out why. A lot of the times you can improve your brand that way. So first of all, you need to find out who's your organic ambassadors, who's already telling people about you, who's already shouting from the rooftops how amazing you are, and start rewarding them for that to make them even better ambassadors and going out there and kind of going over and above what they're already doing. And then secondly, if you want to do a formal ambassador program where you want to put someone on a retainer speaking on your behalf, it's really important to do some research into who your target market is, find out who they actually value and who they actually follow and deem as influencers, but also who they deem credible and who they trust, and start building a relationship from there and see if it fits in with their lifestyle, whatever you're selling, so that it is authentic and that they would be enthusiastic brand ambassadors for you.
There's that buzzword again. That's a 2019 authentic buzzword. Yeah. But it's 100% true. Authenticity, factuality, you know, being honest about who you are. In the B2B side of things, again, Twitter is our mainstay, and it's exactly where we find the right people for our brands. We spend some time, we do our keyword research, we have a look, we type in hashtag AI, hashtag 5G, whatever the topic is that you want to discuss. You see who's talking about it. You do your due diligence. You spend a few hours per influencer or more, depends on your budget, depends on the amount of time you can invest in it. Obviously, it will grow and you'll understand as you go along. You form these relationships. You find out that you've got the right people. You know, you see what kind of engagement they're getting, even from just a straight visual, how many likes and retweets and comments they're getting. You see who they like, who they follow. And at some point, you send them a direct message and you say, hey, can we have a chat? We've potentially got a brand partnership for you. We think you'd be a great fit, but we'd like to have a proper phone call and find out. And from a B2B side of things, that's exactly how we do it. We don't generally engage with people because it's ambassador marketing most of the time. We want a long-term relationship, and it's like anything else. If you're going to start working with somebody, rare, if you're going to hire somebody, you're going to meet them and do the handshake, right? So you're going to do the same here. Difference being now, obviously, we have to do it over Zoom, but it's all there. We have the phone call. We make sure that we're aligned. We have a bit of a laugh, see if there's a sense of humor there. Twitter chats on B2B tend to be ridiculous. We end up having gifs left, right, and center. We're jumping up and down cats and various other things. It's not as dull as it sounds. So yeah, it's due diligence, do your research, and make sure that you are personality aligned as well, because a lot of brands, even the B2B side of it, have a personality, and that's the one thing that people tend to forget. Every brand has a personality, and it doesn't matter what industry they're in.
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen a shift from the sort of championing of aesthetics and what appears to sort of align with a brand's sort of visual aspect, and more about drilling down into who your user base is, what they champion and what they talk about. I think there's a big thing to say about the value of brand recognition for advocates. You know, if you've got an existing, let's say, customer who absolutely loves your product, you know, the value of word of mouth marketing, you know, you can essentially double your sales through potentially, you know, engaging with people on a face-to-face basis. And someone who's more integrated and more educated on the product is going to provide more valuable content, be that on social media or be that face-to-face, wherever sort of they are participating. We typically always do a Zoom call with, well, now we have to do a Zoom call. Before it was in our office, sadly. So we do a Zoom call with ourselves, the influencers and the brands, and it gives that opportunity for the brands to talk a bit about them, what they want from the campaign, what is their ethos, what's their mission, what are you trying to achieve? And it also gives a fantastic platform for the influencers to ask those questions. You know, what do they need to know to ensure that they can produce value-driven content?
Yeah, I mean, and all of the B2B side of things, whenever we strategize for a campaign, we have our sort of A to Z's, you know, of what we would do, but we always ask our influencers, because they're the people with the expertise. Essentially, at the end of the day, we are marketers. We may have put lots of influencers in restaurants. We may have talked about tech with a bunch of other influencers, but we're not the people actually doing the tech. We're not the people actually, you know, reading these, you know, 100-page white papers on the topic. They're the experts, and it's down to what they want to actually convey. And if they have an idea of what's not actually being seen already out there, that's great, because, you know, we'd like to tailor it that way. Generally, you know, if they have a spark of an idea, it's going to be something different to what we've got. We just sort of sandwich it into the best ways we can of distributing it, you know, via, you know, a podcast, a vlog, a blog, whatever.
I absolutely agree with that. I think for us as well, when you start with an inception of an idea, like David says, we're marketers in the end of the day, and we come across so many different campaigns, and we also set in our ways. So when we actually identify an influencer that's going to be a headliner, we try to pull them in and see what their thoughts are, because ultimately they know their audience a lot better than we do. They know what works, they know what will get engagement, they know what will get reach, and what will actually look authentic to their followers. So we always have to involve them in the kind of process.
Yeah, definitely. I think gone are the days where, you know, briefs will just be sent out to people with high numbers. I think there's a way better understanding of who you're trying to reach and how. And I think, you know, from my experience, I think influencers are being more candid about that. You know, they do want to appear authentic to their user base.
So I guess conclusively for our panelists, would you suggest that for a marketer approaching a new project or a business owner understanding how they can increase awareness, should you dismiss kind of a one-time influencer transaction in its entirety, or is there still some merit in kind of having these one-off campaigns where it's kind of, here's a product, promote it, and we'll track the results?
I think there's definitely space for both. There is some campaigns that calls for a one-off. Maybe it is literally introducing a product to the market, and that will evolve into something else maybe later on. Not everything needs to be an always-on campaign and using ambassadors. There's definitely a space for that. But if you want to build that long-term relationship with audiences and connect your brand to someone who they see as credible and trusting, then definitely have a plan to do an ambassador campaign down the line. A lot of the times, our ambassador campaigns start off as once-off projects. And some of their influencers just do so amazingly well for the brand, and they're just such a good fit and alignment that it just evolves into an ambassador program organically, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, even from a B2B perspective, I mean, our end game, our end goal is to have a long-term relationship that we can just build upon. And to that end, a lot of business-to-business brands tend to bring their influencer marketing in-house after it's been set up. So you might develop it for a year, you'll strategize, you'll make the right contacts, you'll see a few people fall away, you know, over the early stages, and then you'll see who's actually a bit of a mainstay and wants to actually keep going with it. I've been involved in campaigns and brands where their ambassador marketing has retained at least 50% of their ambassadors over the course of 4 years, and it continues. And it becomes, as I said, it becomes a relationship. But yes, it can be an individual sort of product launch aspect of it, even in the B2B side of things, especially when you're talking about a software or a product that you want to send out. And there is a bit of crossover between the B2B and B2C as a result there. But yeah.
I think our learnings is that it's not a one-size-fits-all in influence marketing. It really does come down to the brand and what the objective is. From our point of view, I think why we wanted to champion ambassador marketing was because we felt that perhaps a static post is great and it might have the impact you're looking for. But from an audience perspective, if you follow someone and respect their point of view and what they champion, as an individual, and they've chosen to partner with a brand, and be an ongoing ambassador and shouting about them and genuinely care, you're probably more likely to go and check out that brand yourself. And as you said, it doesn't always work that way. It completely depends on what the product is and what the point of the campaign is. But I think that's sort of how we like to approach it.
Yeah, and how many followers do you need to have to become an ambassador or be an ambassador? Because my other thought was, surely we're all ambassadors. We're all ambassadors for us. Well, if we have our own brand ourselves, or maybe for our company. David, you recently wrote I saw your LinkedIn post on employee advocacy and how they are the best advocate for your company. In that way, your employees are your ambassadors. So in your opinion, how do you define how to become an ambassador or be considered as one?
Yeah, I think to be considered an ambassador, it boils down to having a belief in the brand or the company itself. From an outside perspective, if you're an influencer or a tech expert or any kind of expertise that's relevant to their brand, then it takes relationship building, it takes time, it takes conversations, it takes virtual or physical handshakes, and it takes lunches and conversations over the time. If you're talking about employee advocacy, then realistically, if you have a dedicated employee, they're automatically ambassadors for your company. It's a case of asking them to take part and share the wealth, basically. If they really care about your business and they want to invest and see it as a career, then they're going to take that extra step. And if they don't know how to take that extra step, you can put it through your company intranet or newsletter or whatever you have. Newsletter is so old. And simply just say these are our processes. But like with working with influencers, employees and their advocacy has to be regulated to some extent, so they need to know what they can and cannot post. They need to have a certain leeway, a certain amount of individuality about it, but they also need to know where the limits are as well, because it might be that a brand wants to announce a product at the end of next week, but you've got a very excitable individual who suddenly tweets or Instagrams about it, and suddenly cat's out of the bag. It's not always going to happen, but a few little guidelines are always helpful.
For sure.
Yeah. I think in the B2C space, it's also quite similar, where we use a lot of people who obviously are champions of the brand already. So it's finding people who are really passionate about a brand. In South Africa, we use a lot of nano influencers for that, because they are naturally really passionate about things. They talk about it in any case, whether it's on their social media, whether it's in person, to their friends, to their families. And to that respect, we are all ambassadors for something. We all have experts in some niche. I know when people want to know what's the next good thriller to read, they will ask me. If they want to know about gardening, they'll ask my mother. So in that respect, we're all ambassadors. But when it comes to formalized ambassadorship, it's definitely not about your amount of followers. It is about how passionate you are. Are you speaking to the right people online and offline? Do you meet the requirements that kind of fits with a brand and alignment? And as David says, we have to find and define those parameters for them as well. You can't just have someone willy-nilly represent a brand online. There has to be some parameters, but generally we just want them to be really passionate about your brand and your product, to spread that positivity.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the sort of brand recognition piece. I think particularly with nano-sized influencers and micro-influencers, if they are more integrated with the brand, they're going to be pumped. They want really excited to sort of share, their partnership. So you're likely to get really engaged, really enthusiastic, genuine content. And I think that sort of falls in with the shift in what people are looking for in content. It's gone from the products and the buying aspect, and it's more about the ethos and the brand. And are you going to invest in the brand and continue to on an ongoing basis and partner with them, through into the foreseeable future?
Absolutely. We see that when we are working with the smaller influencers, we put them in a training room together with the brand kind of representatives. And they feel so special that they were kind of handpicked to represent this brand for how long a period it is, that they do go above and beyond. And they really well rewarded other monetary or with actual kind of trade exchanges, but they feel so amped to be part of a brand, and they shout it from the rooftops.
100%. We used to do that prior to COVID. And it was a case of getting the head honchos, if you will, of the brand, you know, the marketing director and sometimes even the owner in the room as well. So there'd be five staff members on one side, then you'll have maybe just 5 influencers or experts on the other side, all with little goodie bags, and you sit down and you have your presentation, you tell them exactly what you're looking to achieve. Not that you haven't already had these conversations, so they know to some extent, but then you romance them, you know, effectively. You know, you tell them exactly why you think they are worthwhile. And I've done this with influencers that have 50,000 followers on Twitter and influencers that have 1,000 followers on Twitter. But they all talk about the same topic. They all talk about something that's relevant, and they all have the passion for it. And you'll find as well that the ones with like the nano influencers that Anne's talking about, they have just as much, if more, passion than anybody else. So they're bending over backwards to share content. And it's not just because they're brand aligned. It's not just because they're talking with a big, HD manufacturer or a computer company. They literally have a passion for what they talk about. They want to talk about it on any opportunity they possibly can, and just to have this little bit of recognition, fantastic for them.
And would you say then, you know, because of course that there could be a tendency for some brands, maybe if they have a limited amount of time or resource, to say, you know, we'll launch an ambassador program, we'll call them ambassadors, we'll give them some products, and then, you know, that they'll go and crack on. Would you kind of agree that the campaign is only going to be as impactful or successful as the work that you mutually put in? And you touched on earlier that it's really interesting, it's really important to have trust and transparency. It's great to get feedback. How much time would you invest in each person?
Influencer marketing has to be part of your overall marketing strategy. If you add it as if you put it as an add-on, a little thought because you read an article once and you think you can do it, you might be able to do it, but it'll be bad. I'm sorry, it won't work. A one-time hit is just not going to work for you. You need to integrate it, because ultimately your company is going to have a blog. You're going to be putting content out there often. You can have your social media posts, but you need to find time for these ambassadors and squeeze them in the right places. It needs to flatter the rest of your marketing efforts. Here's a goodie bag, feel free to start saying nice things and say about it for the rest of your life it's not going to happen.
No, I agree. You need to put in the effort to kind of maintain those relationships that you started building to get them to a place where they are your ambassadors. And that, like David said, they need to be part and parcel of your marketing strategy. They need to feel like they're part of it. They need to be part of the conversations, and just feel part of the team. And that's what ultimately makes a really, really good ambassador program, because they are ultimately your kind of spokesperson. They're the face of your brand to a lot of people. So they need to feel part of the team. If you're literally just going to give them a couple of things and pay attention to them for a month, you're going to see it kind of taper off, and it's not going to work.
Yeah, we used to have sort of, again, prior to COVID, sort of meet and greets, but now it's virtual meet and greets in itself, you know, monthly check-in, that kind of thing, conversation, find out how things are going, what can we do. But when it was the physical aspects, it was every 3 to 4 months, you know, we met up, had something to eat, went to a bar, played ping pong, whatever, you know, it's literally just to make you feel exactly what Anne said, you're part of the team, you're valuable. And while we're not, from the B2B side of things, paying, we'll pay you transport, we'll buy you some drinks, you know, we'll make you happy. We want to work with you in the long term. And again, it's relationships. If you become friends, you can stay valuable to each other for the long term.
Yeah, I think when we're building briefs for programs, we sort of, you know, it's not just about what's happening this month, it's about what's happening for the next quarter, the next 6 months, and really having them understand why they're posting and why they should be excited about it. But equally, I think, you know, providing too much of a static brief leads to static content. So I think empowering people to use their own initiative and their own creativity to create content that is reflective of not only their feed and their individual personality, but aligned with that of the brand is really important.
And how would you measure, you know, end of month 3, what does a successful campaign or a successful ambassador relationship look like? I know I read in the article that you shared, David, that for a relationship building exercise, it might be quite hard to quantify, you know, on a piece of paper and say, okay, these are the results, because that might be quite tricky. But what across all of the panel, what would be your kind of key measurements of success?
Yeah, I mean, it's the lag from the B2C side of things in regards to the vanity metrics. You still need them to some extent. If you're building a brand, you know, people look at how many people follow you straight away. I think it's going to be that way for a long term. But you can see from some of the activities that you run. So I'll give you an example. So if you're running a Twitter chat, you do them generally on a monthly basis. You promote it a couple of weeks ahead of time, you know, in increments, posts every week or every few days, just in the lead up to it. Even to the day before you promote it, an hour before, saying don't forget to join. You make sure you mention other people that you want to join. You've invited lots of people to take part, and you have your key panelists like we do now, but they're your ambassadors. You maybe have 10 of those taking part. It runs for an hour. People are talking about set questions that you've designed. Everything looks glamorous and lovely and everything. Then somebody throws in a cat gif or a dog gif, and then it all goes to pot. But it becomes fun. And then you'll see the likes, but what you really want to see is the comments and the retweets. And then you'll collate those at the end of the day, and you'll see it. And for every question or for every post you put out, you make sure that there's a hyperlink, a condensed hyperlink to your blog post or your e-paper download or your next webinar, and see who's signing up. And then it's all through your Google metrics to have a look there and see where the actions come through. That's the best way from the B2B side of things, of actually seeing and quantifying the responses. You're not going to see it quite so heavily, or certainly not quite so quickly, as you will do over the space of 1 hour. But the rest of the time, it's a case of having a look. If you've gotten an ambassador to write, to do a Q&A for a blog post that you've put out on your brand's website, you do it on May 1st, and then at the end of the month, you have a look at your Google metrics and you see you've gotten a spike here, spike there, and where the traffic's coming from. But over the course of 3 months, you'll see it develop. I did this with Twitter chats for a brand, and the first one, I think we had maybe 11 people take part. By month 12, it was on average, there was usually around 10 to 15 ambassadors taking part, and they're taking an hour out of their day once a month just to do this. And the spike is huge. And then there's the rest of the people, and it's not just people that are representatives of your own brand. It's not just at Intel, at Apple, or whatever. They are, they are valuable, independent individuals that want to take part. So, after 3 months, if the number of attendees has risen, you're doing well. If the responses are coming through, you're doing well. If the retweets are there, you're doing well. Basically, if you're getting traction and it's people sharing the information that you haven't paid for, you're doing well.
Okay.
Yeah. I think in our space as well, from B2C, it depends on obviously what the objectives are of the ambassador program or the influencer campaign, and whether those obviously have spiked or you're doing really well measuring on that. But with ambassador programs, I think it's really important to remember it's a long-term thing. It's not a quick fix. Like David says, you need to look at it. What happened? What was it like before? What is it in month 1? And what is it by month 3 or month 6 even, if you're seeing that results? With a lot of ambassadorship on the B2C side, it's generally kind of boosting reputation online as well. It's like a form of PR. Like, has that sentiment gone up when you actually just put out a quick survey, ask people if they recall the brand, what do they feel about it? Looking at those comments, you can also easily see if people are talking about your brand. Are they talking about it in a favorable way? Are they not? And I think for ambassadorship, that's really important to see if it actually increases the positivity or the sentiment of your brand, and the awareness, mostly also awareness.
Yeah, I think I was pretty much echoes what I was going to say. It's very much an exercise in brand awareness. And I think where you have ambassadors speaking not on behalf of the brand, but in conjunction with the brand, articulating ethos and values, if that's done in a consistent way on an ongoing basis, in a way which really does align with the brand, if 6 months of that activity, someone who's viewing that in month 1 may not have engaged with it in the same way that they do in month 6. You know, you don't necessarily always act on, let's say, an ad. You don't always purchase straight away. It's something that goes into the back of your mind, and then perhaps you see it again down the line. You think, oh, actually, well, we'll check that out. I think the value is the consistency and longevity. Of course, vanity metrics and e-com statistics are important, but I think they need to go hand in hand.
Yeah, at the beginning of the webinar, all three of you kind of concluded that the industry was moving much more towards authenticity and community. So, you know, where do you see that further accelerating? Jono.
I think it's going to be sustained. I think this way of, you know, I think the pandemic has forced a more sensitive nature around social media. People are more engaged with what they're putting up, is more genuine. I think I would hope that it's sustained out of the pandemic and sort of into the future, whatever it holds. You know, I think the days of just aesthetics and getting things to look right is one thing, but I think the value in really having someone that is authentically in line with your brand will be sustained, and it will carry on.
I hope you're right, John, because I also see that happening. Just that those deeper conversations that started happening in the pandemic, where people are caring less about what things look like you say, but actually delving deeper. And I think we're also seeing, and we've seen it over the last couple of years, but it's kind of intensified now, where people are looking to support brands that backs the cause that they really care about. Which also forcing corporates to do good and not just look like they're doing good. It's not just lip service, as you say. So really hoping that will be sustained, really hoping that people keep on doing that more authentic or that more real content that everyone can relate to, not just the elite few, and it's aspirational.
Yeah. I'll jump on the bandwagon. Sure, it's going to be sustained. Yeah. But I think what we, as you say, and I think what we're seeing is people are looking to be more sustainable in their practices. They're looking to be more environmentally sound. They're looking to just be more aware about what's going on. And it's something that, as an agency, we push quite heavily when we're integrating a new client. One of the first questions is, you know, which charity are you aligned with? Do you have a charity, or do you have a leaning towards doing some good in some way? And it's not to sort of, you know, it's not to sort of stand over them and go, you should be doing better. It's to say, look, you know, where have you been, you know, championing before, even if it's just giving a sandwich to somebody on the street or sending some money to a cancer trust every now and again. Is there something that you want your brand to be aligned with? And if so, we can speak to them and we can see how we can work together. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot more of as well. Brands and individuals actually really wanting to do something that will make a difference.
I think it's exciting as well for like 2021 and onwards. You know, there's potential to champion not only the ethos-driven stuff, but also the experiential content that was so cool to sort of engage with. And obviously, historically, you know, performed very well on social media. And I think, you know, the combination of both of those, where it's super informed, educational, on brand, you know, that performs provides a really strong platform for brands to really shout about themselves and have strong ongoing partnerships. Roll on 2021.
And my final question before we can invite the audience to ask their own is kind of, in a very brief summary, what would be your kind of top tips or, you know, key advice for someone, you know, considering kickstarting their own ambassador program?
From our side, I think it's really understanding who you're trying to reach and who is your audience. You know, typically we tend to break them down into personalities or demographics, understanding who those demographics are, and then, you know, going through, as Anne was saying, going through different things like channels like Twitter or Instagram, Facebook, wherever your audience base is, and finding someone that is an absolute frother for your brand and getting them on board, having those conversations, getting them educated. I think the education piece is essential. If you're not doing that, you're missing a trick. You have to have them really understand what you're about, not just about the products, but the ethos as well.
I absolutely echo everything you've just said. It is literally finding people who are so passionate about your brand. And if you want to go the celebrity or macro influencer route, find someone who really reflects your values, who you can see kind of aligns with the lifestyle you're trying to promote. So it is just kind of looks authentic and organic. Sorry, I keep saying authentic and it just sounds horrible. It's such a buzzword. But it looks organic, right? It fits in with their lifestyle. So even when with the regulations that's come in everywhere now, where you have to be super clear that you are in a partnership or super clear that something's being paid for, that's the audience, they don't actually mind because it still fits into what they deem is right for them. And definitely that education part, when you get your ambassadors on board, please educate them so that they know what to do, what not to do, what your brand is all about, so they don't kind of step out of line and embarrass everyone. And then also just obviously make sure that they remain part of that team on a long-term basis, otherwise it won't work.
Yeah, I think it's much easier from a B2B perspective, in that yeah, everybody can do that. It's fine. It's because our alignment with our influencers right from the offset is very, very clear. We've done our Twitter keyword due diligence. We've looked at the size of their account and what they've shared and everything before we have the phone call and waste their time. But ultimately, the first thing we say is, after our introductions is, just so you know, we don't pay. Then if you hear the bzzz, the dead dial tone, you know that you've lost out, but generally 98%, this is my own calculation, but I can only count on one hand the amount of people that I've contacted that have said no to taking part in programs. Generally around 98% say, look, I'm in, I have this amount of time for social, or this amount of time for alignment with other brands. You're a brand I like, otherwise I wouldn't have responded to your direct message in the first place. I like what you're doing, tell me more. And the response is always, tell me more. So we do, we educate, like Anne says. We say, this is exactly what we're doing. We will fit it around your schedule. There's going to be anywhere between 10 and 20 ambassadors of differing size, and we're going to work with you for as long as you want to take part. And if at some point you say, look, I don't have time for it this month, you can take a break. It's fine. We're not going to just throw your phone number out the window. We'll come back to you in a month, let us know where you are, and we'll pick up with you again. In the meantime, we'll carry on with the rest of our plan. And it's all about planning and education and making sure that everybody knows what they're getting out of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think going on with the planning thing, I think it's really important for brands to understand, is it sustainable for them to do this? How much, knowing exactly what they want to allocate for the campaign, be it product or monetary. Obviously brands have been hit by the pandemic, that's no secret. But with that, sort of echoing what David said before, there's no point starting a campaign and then it's sort of just disappearing and dropping off, and then doing a big hoo-ha about having ambassadors and then it just disappears, because that inevitably means that people aren't going to trust you. So, really planning before you start, know who you're trying to reach, how you're going to do it, and sort of, setting it in motion in the right way.
Okay, fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you so much for asking all the questions. If anyone from the audience would like to ask their own, that would be greatly encouraged. So feel free to. You can either write in the chat, like I mentioned, or you could just ask out loud, whichever works best. Any questions?
I've got a question. David, how'd you get your hair so shiny?
Shampoo. Yeah.
It looks great. I need to try it.
Yeah, it's good in it, right? The light. I set this up. I've got the ambient light coming through the window. Then I've got the overhead light as well, so I'm crossing it. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Powerful.
I see you shaved.
have a question, if I may. So it's Gunnar here.
Is it about Anne?
We got Anne in South Africa. We got David in Brazil. What are the nuances culturally and maybe geographically in this? I'm sure there must be some.
David, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I mean, I've only been in Brazil for about 8 months now. But from what I'm witnessing from the social media channels here, the ambassador side of things is there with the B2C side, and it's growing with the B2B. It's more down to the social channels that are used than anything else. Brazil is basically the testing ground for pretty much every new element of a social media. Instagram Reels came to Brazil first. LinkedIn's live streaming aspect came to Brazil first. Facebook tends to test everything it can find here first, which is always interesting. Twitter did the same with their fleet. Yeah, nobody uses it, so nobody remembers. It's more about the testing ground of the socials than it is anything else.
Why do you think? Why Brazil? Sorry, why do you think it's Brazil?
I think it's because it's such it's such a massive country in itself. So you can see a lot of almost instant results. But at the same time, it's not quite so I think it's not quite so visual as North America and Europe, in that if they make a mistake or it doesn't work, they can pretty much sign it off, because nobody knows anything that's happening in Brazil. Hands up if you know who our president is. Yeah. So there you go. It's a great way to actually just test anything and not have to worry about the results, quite frankly. But if the results are positive, then you roll it out elsewhere. Makes sense.
That's really interesting, actually. In South Africa, our nuances is mostly based in kind of different cultures and different languages. We have 11 different languages, official languages in South Africa, and every kind of province has got their most predominant one. So for brands, it's very important for us to make sure that when they speak to markets, that they do it in different languages as well, where our ambassadors and influencers are amazing at, because we choose a variety across languages, across cultures, to reach the real people. And we ask them, please don't just do content in English. Please do it in your home language, in your vernacular, to make it even more real. And people kind of get a lot more, they relate a lot more to it. So for us, it's very much more the relatable content to real audiences in their home languages.
And you said that South Africa's a few years behind the West in terms of influence marketing. Is it more of a challenge to get brands on board to take part in these campaigns?
It was a couple of years ago when it started kind of really blooming in Australia and the UK and US. It was kind of seen as a fad, and the brands did it, was very happy with it and would continue. But there was a lot of skeptical brands as well who would just kind of see like, give it another year, it will be out of here, we're not going to invest in it. In the last 2 years, we saw that change dramatically, where you could really see that change in the brands who would use it effectively as our social media platforms also grew. And it's now pretty easy because we can measure it a lot better now. So we can show case studies of similar industries and say, this is what we've done for brand X, we can do the same for you. We also usually start off with kind of a test campaign if they're a bit hesitant. Just to prove to them that we can reach the objectives, and then usually it's pretty easy.
Yeah, I think test campaigns work pretty well. In the B2B side of things, we can sort of, as we said before, it's a bit of a slow burn for long-term gain, but you can do sort of a teaser or test elements in itself. Look, give us a month, we'll find you some really invested people, we'll get you some content, and we'll see this, we'll see the spikes, and then we'll take it from there. And we do it. We expand it by a month, then 3 months, then 6 months, and it's building on a strategy that was there. But that's what we pitch initially. It's always a 1, 3, and 12-month strategy, so you can see the growth opportunity and see how it goes.
Okay. Oh, I think we've got one question from Joey. Which platform are you using to find influencers and brand ambassadors, if any, or any other tips and tricks, and how to find the right ones?
I think, again, it depends on your objective and who you're speaking to. If we're doing B2B, like David does, we in South Africa use LinkedIn mostly. So then that's where we will start looking for experts in certain industries and on certain niches. If it is more B2C, again, look at who's your target market. Where do they spend most of their time? Is it on Instagram? Is it on Twitter? Is it on Facebook? And take it from there. If it's a very visual brand, like you guys do a lot of food is so beautiful to photograph and just kind of make people want to eat it. So then you'd kind of probably go more Instagram than you would Twitter. But it all depends on who you want to reach and how you want to do that.
Yeah, after you gone.
Yeah, Twitter is primarily the source, but we sort of combine it with LinkedIn simply because we try to run the activations across both social platforms. Obviously, LinkedIn is your business and education sort of hub, effectively. It's where people can actually understand each other and believe in each other. Twitter is where we can disseminate the information a little bit easier, and generally we'll see that if you've got a big following on LinkedIn, you're going to have a big following on Twitter. It's for us, it's for reach in regards to that as well. But Instagram is rarely used. I'm trying to push it a little bit more for B2B, but it's not really working so massively well at the moment, but I think it's a growth area. And then it's now I'm just curious to see if Triller or TikTok can have a B2B element as well. But I'd love to see that, and certainly get some kind of humor going into it, but we'll see.
Yeah, we primarily use Instagram ads. That's where we're sort of marketing our brands, using hashtags, location tags, looking at competitor brands to see who's been tagging. But also, there's a lot of value in sort of the brand's inbound comms. If you've got people reaching out to you saying they love your brands, that person is literally your archetypal advocate. So that's where you start that conversation and see how you can, build from there. Don't limit yourself to one platform. Use all of your resources.
Yeah, I think because influencer marketing is obviously social media based, the alignment between a brand's social media manager, if they have one, and the influencer agency has to be hand in hand. I mean, they're always the first port of call. They give the marketing director will give them a certain amount of leeway, make sure that everybody's in the room and aligned, and then it's a case of maybe the social media manager will get in touch with the agency and say, can we do something with this person? Or some brands just don't even have a social media manager. They outsource it, to people like ourselves, to run it as well, which makes perfect sense. As long as the agency has a clear understanding of what the brand does, then they can then run the brand's social account, and then they can constantly be on it. Because let's be fair, everybody's picking up their phone every 5 seconds to check to see if they've gotten a message or if an email's come through or anything like this. As marketers, we're obsessive about it. Even when we're out and about, it's like, interesting, that could work for later on. But we'll see. But the alignment between those two is important.
And as an additional question, what do you do if you suddenly have an ambassador that went rogue and is starting to be a detractor, so that they're not adding any value?
I think the first thing is to pull them off the ambassador program and start distancing your brand from them. A bit of crisis cons, and just kind of, first of all, kind of admit or kind of recognize what's happened. I think one of the worst things brands do sometimes is just turn a blind eye and just kind of pull someone instead of actually just owning it and say, you know what, we worked with this brand ambassador, they went a bit rogue, this is what happened, and we're formally distancing ourselves from this person. We see there was a brand in South Africa, one of their brand ambassadors got a lot of flack, she went completely rogue, and it became a huge thing to the point where she's suing other influencers for slander. It just became a huge mess. And the brand just kept quiet. And people, not only other influencers that's not in the space, but even audiences were starting to ask the brand publicly, why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you distancing yourself? Why aren't you putting out a statement? And it really caused a lot more harm for them. So I think the first thing is just own up that you had a brand ambassador that did something wrong. As soon as possible, put that comms out and start distancing yourself.
Yeah, I think being humble is a really important thing, and also entering into a conversation to understand why. There's a reason why they've gone from your biggest fan to your worst enemy. And I'm sure that they'll have their reasons for that. So getting to the bottom of that to understand that, to ensure that it doesn't happen again, I think is essential as well.
Yeah, it's one of the first things that we clarify with the brand when we start working with them is the difference between employee advocacy and ambassadors or any other influencer is simply that employees will follow the company rule generally. But ambassadors, they are independent experts. That's who we ask. That's what we say straight off away. It's like, you're independent, that's what we want. We understand you've probably worked with a competitor in the past. As long as you're not hand in hand with them now, that obviously we can align with you now. If you were within the past, it's fine. Don't worry about it. However, if you said something bad about us, that might not be so good. But we make sure that the brands understand that they are independent. And as long as we treat them with respect and honesty throughout, the chances of them doing something negative towards the brand are fairly low. But if it does happen, as Anne said, own it. Be honest about it. Try and have a word with the influencer if you can. If they can retract whatever they've said, brilliant. If they can at least be a sort of middle ground and just say, look, we're done, that's the end of it, better, or just as well, but it's about being clear with them straight off.
Yeah. And my final question is from Gabby. She says, what are the best ways to report? Do you use analytics platforms, or do you report manually? So on engagement rate, on social growth, how do you do that, I guess, day to day?
I think it depends on the campaign. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, Jono, you go.
So yeah, typically it depends on the campaign and what the objective is. Some objectives will require you to use a platform as such. But typically when we're reporting on our influencer activity, we're looking at one that we actually showcase the content as part of that reporting. It isn't just a number. That's a subjective thing to the brands. They're looking at it and saying, does that actually hold the value that I'm looking for? Does it articulate the brand ethos? But also looking at important, the stats, the engagement rates, the number of posts, how many people liked, how many people commented. Of course, these things we are moving away from, the vanity metrics space, but they still provide some form of, an ROI to brands as well.
Yeah, I think it's like John said, it's a combination of both. It depends on what the campaign needs. There's a lot of tools out there that you can use these days, especially if you have a huge campaign going with like hundreds of influencers. It's very time consuming to do it manually if you can have a tool that can just aggregate it for you. But it is very important to have the content as part of the reporting. Like John said, you want the brand to see what value these pieces of content brought, and also show them which ones work the best, which ones didn't, so you can tweak for future. But it all depends on what your objectives were in the start.
Yeah. To mirror that, yeah, there's lots of software out there. Some of them you'll have to pay for, other ones have free access to up to, 5 or 10 influencers or something to monitor. For B2B, generally we'll manually do it, simply because our programs generally are around 10 influencers and it's on a monthly basis, and we'll keep a track on it on a weekly basis. So, adding it up bit by bit is not so difficult. As Anne said, sometimes there are the vanity metrics there that brands like to have. These softwares will automatically create your report for you if you'd like, but ultimately, I don't think there's one agency that I've worked with that just blindly takes the report straight from these softwares and just hands it over and says, hey, this is how we did. We have to tweak it, we have to change it, because there's always another element that needs to be put in there, and it doesn't always fit the bill. But yeah, we need to see exactly which elements have worked, which haven't, and see the difference between last month and this month, and what you're hoping for the following month.
Yeah, for sure. Wonderful. No, thank you so much again. Well, thank you everyone for the questions, and thank you to our panelists for answering them, and also everyone for joining. Yeah, we've really enjoyed taking part. A big thank you to the Danish Chamber of Commerce and the Finnish Chamber of Commerce as well for having us. It's much appreciated. Yeah, we're all finished. But have a lovely, lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining and listening to us, and I hope that we added some value to you and you've learned something today. So thank you very much.
For sure.
You too.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.